Hey, everybody. It is Tuesday, December 2nd. You're listening to the Mo News podcast. It's Moshe Wanunu here.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to on this National Bartender Day. Jill, tip your bartenders.
Whenever you're listening to this, you might need a drink. It's that time of year.
They got a lot of mocktails on the menu now, too.
That wasn't what I was referring to, but...
Right? There's dry January. I haven't heard much about dry December.
Because it's not a thing.
It's not a thing. But,
no.
But nonetheless, I've tried some good mocktails of late.
Also want to quickly shout out the TSA, which says Sunday was the biggest travel day of the Thanksgiving holiday rush, and also the busiest in the agency's history. 3.13 million passengers were screened at the nation's airports.
Yeah, actually, if you look at the top 10 biggest days in TSA history, Jill, all basically in the last year and a half or so. The previous record was held back in June. Before that, last Thanksgiving. But looks like more and more people are flying these days. So I did say to tip your bartenders. If you could legally tip the TSA agents, props to all of them, many of whom, by the way, had to work, through that government shutdown and missed a couple paychecks there. If not a monetary tip, at least give them some verbal love, Jill.
You look great. You're doing a great job. They might find that suspicious, actually, Moshe. Like extra screening for this person who keeps complimenting me.
Why is this person showing me so much love? You're like, I've been listening to this podcast. They told me you deserved it.
All right, now to the headlines, starting with the latest on the military strikes on the alleged drug boats in the Caribbean. The White House confirms a second strike on one of those alleged drug boats. We've got the legal debate around that.
Yeah, this was the first attack back in September, the legal question being about a second strike to kill survivors on that boat. We have what the Naval Operations Manual actually states.
To a courtroom in New York City where this week is the pretrial hearing for the alleged United Healthcare CEO killer, Luigi Mangione, why his defense attorneys say that key evidence should be thrown out.
And it appears his fan club continues to show up outside the courthouse, Jill, cheering him on outside.
To Los Angeles, the mayor's facing backlash for highlighting a home that was rebuilt after the devastating Palisades fire in January. Turns out, no one is living there or likely will ever live there.
It comes as there's frustration in Southern California about how long the rebuilding process is taking.
In health news, how some hospitals figured out ways to cut rates of C-sections, and the Trump administration releasing the results of President Trump's recent MRI.
Or at least a summary from a doctor describing the highlights of the MRI.
Why some workers say it's better for their careers to head back to the office.
Alerting Jill Wagner. Out there in our Long Island bureau.
Guys, do you see the pressure I'm under here? Is this right? Publicly asking me to come back on the podcast?
Jill, you were online shopping during yesterday's podcast recording.
And the White House has unveiled its Christmas decorations. Moshe, there's a portrait of President Trump made out of Lego.
Certainly one of the more unique decorations this year.
And Moshe is on this day in history.
Jill, on this day in history, one of the largest corporate scandals in American history.
All right, starting with questions about those military strikes on alleged drug boats in the Caribbean. The White House said Monday that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth authorized an admiral to conduct multiple strikes on a vessel from Venezuela, allegedly carrying illegal narcotics back in September. So this was the story we told you about yesterday. It was first broken by the Washington Post, which reported over the weekend that back in September, a second strike on that boat was ordered to take out 2 survivors from the initial strike and to comply with an order that everyone be killed. White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt said Monday that Hegseth had authorized Admiral Frank Bradley, who heads the Special Operations Command, to conduct the strikes. Leavitt said the strike was conducted in self-defense to protect U.S. interests. It took place in international waters and was in line with the law of armed conflict. However, Trump said on Sunday that he wouldn't have wanted a second strike on the boat, but he said he had spoken to Pete Hegseth, and Hegseth denied that he gave such an order. Asked for more details about the legality of striking people stranded at sea aboard a blown-up boat, Leavitt repeated the White House claim that they believed it to be legal. Here is the reporter's question and her response.
But the Navy's own manual of law of war says that specifically firing on survivors from a wrecked vessel is an example of a war crime that's forbidden under U.S. law and the law of armed conflict. So was that second strike in following law of armed conflict and then second on immigration?
Again, Andrew, I would reiterate to you the strike was conducted in international waters and in accordance with the law of armed conflict.
So what the reporter is referring to there in the manual, we'll quote from it here, states, this is the Naval Operations Manual for the U.S. military, intentional attack on a combatant who is known to be out of combat constitutes a grave breach of the law of armed conflict. There's a separate law of war manual produced by the Department of Defense that's also pretty categorical here. It states, quote, "It is prohibited to conduct hostilities on the basis that there shall be no survivors, or to threaten the adversary with the denial of quarter, meaning you won't even keep them alive even if they surrender." The manual goes on to state, quote, "This rule is based on both humanitarian and military considerations." All of this super interesting because Trump on Sunday on Air Force One headed back to Washington, took questions from reporters, and he was asked about this secondary strike, this attempt to basically take out anyone who survived the first strike. And he said he was told there was no second strike. He wouldn't have been happy with a second strike. And the White House is being pretty vague about this in their answers. And you heard it there from Caroline Levitt. She reiterated it a couple times. She got an additional question, Jill, from an ABC reporter yesterday, where she said, "You're not listening to me." And then went on to just speak that line that she's been speaking about how they believe it to be legal without answering specifics about a second strike. And clearly there might be legal advice here or reasons as to why they won't go into further detail. But they did, make a point. Levitt makes a point yesterday of pinning this on Admiral Frank Bradley, the head of Special Operations Command, not explicitly Pete Hegseth. We should add in that first strike, 11 people total were killed. And then according to the Washington Post report that sort of broke this story late last week, DOD changed its protocol, changed how it approached further attacks. And there were actual survivors of attacks after that that the U.S. would go on to release to their home countries. This all comes as there's a lot of scrutiny happening on Capitol Hill, not just from Democrats, as to be expected, but actually a number of senior Republicans on the House Armed Services Committee and the Senate Armed Services Committee, which both have oversight over the Department of Defense. They held a call with the Joint Chiefs Chairman, Dan Kane, he's the highest official in the U.S. military, to discuss the legality of the lethal military strikes around Latin America right now. Kane's call with the Republican and Democratic leaders, as reported here by the Washington Post, included a conversation about the Latin America mission's intent and legality, according to a very brief account of the exchange. The general, according to the DOD, said he expressed his trust and confidence in the experienced commanders at every echelon. We are waiting for more details from the folks on Capitol Hill. But Jill, this story isn't going away anytime soon. You can expect to see hearings likely next year on this, unless they're able to get Hegseth before them in the coming weeks before the Christmas holiday. Separately, it comes as we're watching what's unfolding here. There was a meeting late Monday afternoon at the White House to discuss what happens next in regards to Venezuela. About a third of the entire U.S. Navy is now situated outside Venezuela. It's come after multiple calls between President Trump and Maduro, the dictator of Venezuela. The U.S. effectively urging here for Maduro to step down, Maduro making a bunch of demands. If he is to step down, and does not appear the two sides have seen eye to eye yet as of this recording. Remember, over the weekend, President Trump attempting to close Venezuelan airspace, a lot of international airliners following that declaration, even though technically the U.S. can't close another country's airspace. But certainly a lot of airlines are like, if the leader of the country with the largest air force in the world is telling us not to fly over a certain country, let's avoid it right now. So we're watching all of this unfold, and we'll bring you the latest developments over on our Instagram page.
Okay, now to the latest on the trial of the accused United Healthcare CEO killer Luigi Mangione. For the first time, prosecutors played the 911 call from a Pennsylvania McDonald's that led to Mangione's arrest. He is in court this week in New York City for a multi-day pretrial hearing. His lawyers are trying to get some of the evidence against him thrown out. They say police questioned him for about 20 minutes before they read him his Miranda rights, like telling him that he has the right to remain silent. They're also arguing that police illegally searched his backpack at that McDonald's where he was arrested because they didn't have a search warrant. So Mangione himself was in court. He was wearing a suit as he had requested. He also requested that his hands be unshackled so he could take notes, which he did throughout the proceeding. He is accused of shooting United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson on the streets of Midtown Manhattan last year. The 27-year-old was arrested at a McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania, 5 days later. And as I mentioned, prosecutors played a recording of that 911 call that led to his arrest. In the call, there was an unnamed McDonald's manager telling an emergency dispatcher, quote, "I have a customer here that some other customers were suspicious of, that he looks like the CEO shooter from New York." According to the manager, there was an older female customer that was really upset and frantic after seeing Mangione eating breakfast there. The female manager says, "I can't approach him." She tried to identify him, but said the only thing you could see are his eyebrows. "I don't know what to do here, guys." The dispatcher said that an officer was en route to McDonald's. The judge has not ruled on whether to allow that audio into the trial.
One of the bigger questions will be how much of the evidence found on Mangione, as well as what he told police, will be allowed here. Now, it's pretty typical that, one of the key tactics of any defense team is to get evidence thrown out, particularly evidence where he incriminates himself and, frankly, is carrying a gun, the murder weapon here. Mangione's attorneys are trying to limit it, saying that the evidence here was inappropriately obtained by law enforcement. Defense attorneys saying that Altoona, Pennsylvania police officers questioned Mangione for 20 minutes before reading him his rights. They also searched his backpack without a warrant. In that backpack, they would find the 9mm handgun, ammunition, electronics, a notebook where he describes his plan to kill the United Healthcare CEO. They argue that that was inappropriate. Prosecutors argue that police searching his backpack were justified in doing so to make sure there were no dangerous items inside it, and so they didn't need a search warrant for that. And that all the statements that Mangione made to the police were voluntary and were made before he was under arrest. So it'll be interesting here to see how the judge rules on this, how much of the evidence is viewed as admissible. Certainly, if he does make a ruling in favor of Mangione here, that could involve a lot of potential evidence here that the prosecutors are looking to use, evidence that, if part of the trial, will be difficult for Mangione to explain away. That weapon, the ammunition, the notebook saying he was planning to kill the guy. So we will await the ruling here from the judge on some of the most critical evidence in the case.
A trial date still hasn't been set. Mangione facing both state and federal charges. So some analysts say, depending on how the judge rules, prosecutors might decide that they want to move forward with the federal case first. Because if a judge, Moshe, as you mentioned, decides to limit that key evidence, prosecutors might not be able to use Mangione's writings, which they say paint the motive for the crime, also the alleged murder weapon. And if not, they would have to rely on more circumstantial evidence, and the case becomes a lot harder to prove.
Right. Just a reminder, there's the two cases, right? The federal case and the state case. This week's hearing is at New York State Supreme Court. That's where he's charged with second-degree murder. For those who ask, in New York State law, second-degree murder is really what first-degree murder is in many states, so don't read too much into that. It's a technicality as far as New York State law is concerned. But Mangione did get a legal victory of sorts back in September when a judge tossed out the act of terrorism charges that the feds were trying to bring against him, saying that this case did not merit terrorism charges. And so you have the two potential cases here. Federal judges tend to be a bit more lenient when it comes to evidence than state cases. Notable, Jill, depending on what order things go in here, the federal case is where Mangione faces the death penalty.
Time for the speed read, starting in Los Angeles, where there has been a ton of backlash against Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass over the rebuilding or lack thereof since the Pacific Palisades fires back in January. From Politico, LA Mayor Karen Bass last week announced what she was touting as a major milestone in the recovery from January's wildfires that destroyed 13,000 homes across the region. So the headline was that a 4-bedroom house in the Pacific Palisades had received its final approval from the city, making it the first house to be rebuilt after the fires. But there was a major problem. The house was not rebuilt for a displaced family. It was actually a model home built by a developer. Not only that, the developer had actually applied for permits before the fire, looking to bulldoze a vacant home on the lot and build this new model home. So the new house is now meant to serve as a model property for what the company could build for Palisades residents who have lost their homes. And once residents realized that the property the mayor was announcing wasn't intended for anyone who had actually lost their home in the fire, there was immediate backlash, the mayor actually going so far as to delete her original posts celebrating the milestone.
So the city then later reposted the announcement with added context, saying the speed at which the developer finished the house still shows what is possible here for families still waiting to rebuild. This developer looking to rebuild dozens of the homes there in the Palisades. But it still speaks to the frustration right now that a lot of residents of the Palisades feel right now. They're looking for a speedier process to rebuild. And it comes as you have the mayor and the governor saying, actually, this is the fastest we've ever been able to rebuild. The process we have here is rapid by California standards. Now, California, of course, is notorious for a lot of red tape. But at the same time, when you compare the fire aftermath in Southern California from earlier this year to previous major fires, the Woolsey fires, the Camp Fire, the Carr Fire, the Tubbs Fire, there you saw homes getting rebuilt between 7 to 9 months after the fire. In this case, we're nearly 11 months in, just over 11 months in at this point. And you just have a developer home and then potentially another home that I saw reported out of Altadena, though there have been about 1,100 home rebuilding permits that have been approved so far, and there are some additional ones on the way.
From NBC News, the White House on Monday released a summary of the results of an MRI scan that President Trump underwent recently. From what had been described as a routine physical in October, the president's doctor says that he is in excellent health. The White House physician, Sean Barbabella, writing in a memo that the MRI was of Trump's cardiovascular system and abdomen, and said that all of the imaging was, quote, perfectly normal. He said the imaging was done, quote, because men in his age group benefit from a thorough evaluation of cardiovascular and abdominal health. Trump is 79. He is the oldest president to ever take office in American history. The MRI was first mentioned to Trump several weeks ago. Reporters have been pushing for more information. The scan was done on October 10th during what the White House press secretary described as Trump's, quote, routine yearly checkup, even though he did undergo an annual physical in April.
Right. It looks like he's doing it about every 6 months here. As you know, Jill, he is the oldest president in American history. The memo that they released yesterday calls this type of scan standard for an executive physical at Trump's age, though it's anything but standard, these sort of preventative MRIs, though we have seen more and more of them for people who can afford them. Among various leaders out there, we actually partnered a couple of years ago, Jill, with a company called Prenuvo that does these preventative MRIs. So we are seeing that at some places. We heard that from some folks in the medical field, even though it's again very rare to do preventative MRIs. It is done in some cases, but Trump sort of touched this whole thing off when he mentioned he had an MRI, and then reporters are like, "On what? For what?" And he's like, I don't know, but it was great. And so this has been an issue for a couple of weeks now, leading the White House to finally release this summary, this memo on Monday. But certainly, Jill, for some people, some answers, for some people, not enough there. And especially coming off of the Biden presidency, where we have learned in the aftermath, and some people suspected it during the presidency, that we weren't being told everything about his medical condition, especially as now we're going to have two presidents in a row who will be in their early 80s in the presidency. Certainly, this won't be the last of the questions being asked about his health.
Staying with medical news from the New York Times, a story that led to a ton of messages over on our Mo News Premium Instagram page this weekend. The Times is reporting that some hospitals in the U.S. are reporting lower C-section rates after ending financial incentives for surgery, tracking doctors' individual C-section rates, and expanding midwife-led care. The national average of C-sections in the U.S. has increased in recent years to 32% of births in 2023. That is one of the highest rates in the developed world and way above what is typically seen in Europe, around 20%. It is more than double what the World Health Organization's ideal would be. They say about 10 to 15%. C-sections can be life-saving if they are medically necessary, but they also do carry some higher risks, like longer recoveries for the mother, more complications in future pregnancies, and in severe cases, hemorrhage and sepsis. At Rochester General Hospital in New York, the Times reports that doctors have cut their C-section rate for healthy first-time moms from 40% down to 25% this year, using some of those techniques. The hospital updated its pay system so that doctors wouldn't earn more money for surgery than they would for natural labor, in part leading to a reduction in those C-sections. Nationally, hospitals get about $17,000 from insurance companies for a C-section, as compared to about $11,000 for a vaginal birth.
Yeah, they discovered by making all things equal that actually lowered the rate of C-sections. Their research shows that among the biggest predictors of C-section rates is the physician's compensation structure. But there are more here. Attitudes towards childbirth also matter. Some physicians view C-sections as a way to reduce the risk of birth injuries that can lead to lawsuits. There's certainly legal issues here that they're incentivized to conduct a C-section as opposed to a natural birth, especially given all the malpractice lawsuits out there. Also, doctors say they are dealing with rising maternal risk factors like women having babies at older ages, obesity, and high blood pressure. And then, of course, there are women increasingly who are requesting inductions, want to be able to schedule their births. At the same time, though, it's a very interesting story, Jill, and I think that's why it got a lot of comments from our community on Instagram, whether those in medicine or all the women who have given birth out there. In Rochester, they noted that routing low-risk patients into midwifery care, training nurses in positioning techniques, and empowering staff to take their time with first-time moms all contributed to lowering the C-section rate. They have also moved to educate patients about realistic labor timelines as well. Data has been key here. In Rochester, they review every C-section monthly to identify avoidable surgeries. There was another hospital that they mentioned in the Times piece, Franciscan Health Olympia Fields in Illinois, that cut its C-section rate by a third by comparing doctors' C-section rates and giving staff visual reminders about first-time mothers. And then there's incentive structure here. In New York State, the Medicaid incentive program pays bonuses to hospitals that can reduce cesarean sections. They've already distributed $40 million and produced measurable declines. So a fascinating story, an important story, and we'll have more of it in today's newsletter, over in the Mo newsletter, as well as over on our Instagram page.
To some business news, also from the Times, when large employers like Amazon, JP Morgan, and the federal government tightened their office attendance policies this year, many younger workers were not happy. Opinion surveys from Gallup showed that they were generally more resistant than older workers to go back to the office full time. But the picture is more complicated. According to Gallup, the youngest people were also the least interested in work that's entirely remote. And some new research is shedding light on why that might be. In a recent paper, a team of economists over at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, the University of Virginia, and Harvard found that younger workers are suffering career-wise by working from home. They got less training and fewer opportunities for advancement. And the economists found that remote work even contributed to higher unemployment among younger workers.
There's also a separate New York Times questionnaire that spoke to a whole number of readers who are 30 or younger and found that they actually prefer the feedback that they get actually working in the office as opposed to working at home. One of the issues that young people brought up, and probably is relevant to everyone, is isolation, working at home. Also, young people looking for more mentoring and feedback, hopes that that'll improve the odds of promotion, actually being in the office. The paper that Jill mentioned finds that software engineers at a large e-commerce company received about 20% more feedback on their code when they sat in physical proximity to their colleagues. Obviously, at a number of businesses, they have found that the quality of work can suffer in remote arrangements, especially among younger workers. And so interesting, Jill, we've seen this in some other sectors and other stories with Gen Z, especially being this digitally native population, that they are looking for the human touch, and that includes in the workplace.
Moshe, another thing they found at big companies is that if you work solely from home, you don't get to meet anybody who isn't in your direct team. But if you're in the office, you sometimes run into other people at the coffee machine, in the elevator, wherever it may be. So you're not just meeting the 7 or 8 people that you directly work with every day.
Yeah, opportunities, both social and workplace, productivity, collaboration, meeting people from other units and finding out, oh, you're dealing with that too? Maybe we can fix that.
You might be surprised to hear, Moshe, that I was a social butterfly in the office. I was always a chatty Kathy.
Shocked, Jill. We'd like to have you. We'd love Social Jill. Social Jill. That's our New Year's resolution, to get Social Jill into the office in 2026.
And speaking of the holidays, it is beginning to feel like Christmas at the White House. From the Washington Post, the White House debuting its 2025 Christmas decorations designed by First Lady Melania Trump. The theme, home is where the heart is. It is her first holiday back in charge of White House decor. And she presented a straightforward, even understated, at least by White House standards, look on a tour that has been about halved in size. It is now officially called Christmas at the White House, rather than referring to a broader holiday season. The decorations include Lego portraits of Presidents Donald Trump and George Washington in the green room, 3D printed ornaments on the White House Christmas tree in the blue room, and 75 of what the First Lady's office is calling Mrs. Trump's signature wreaths. The state dining room featured the famed White House gingerbread house made with a record-breaking 120 pounds of gingerbread dough and 3 burgundy-filled trees.
So no surprise, this is a smaller decoration spread because the East Wing is gone right now. It has been bulldozed, and that was always a portion of the White House Christmas tour. Nonetheless, the tours are back. They're expected to bring a lot of people through there in the coming weeks. But it has been noted that Melania Trump, despite being in charge of the decorations, did express frustration over having to deal with decorations during the first term back in 2020. There were private recordings of her that were made that revealed her frustration with having to deal with decorations, saying in one recording, "I'm working my A off on the Christmas stuff that who gives a blank about the Christmas stuff and decorations, but I need to do it, right?" Nonetheless, Melania Trump has been out there at the beginning of the second term, greeting the folks who brought in the new White House Christmas tree and, of course, rolling out the Christmas decorations.
She's so over it.
With 3 Christmases to go after this one, Jill.
I feel like Jill Biden lived for it and was excited. It's not for everybody.
It's not for everybody. I mean, certainly some first ladies were very frustrated with some of the roles and responsibilities with the first lady. Hillary Clinton was a first lady who didn't really want to deal with that stuff. She wanted to deal with like healthcare policy and sort of the stuff happening in the West Wing, and some others like fully leaning into the ceremonial duties of first lady, and certainly Melania Trump, not expecting ever to have this role, learned a lot in her first term. Jill, we had a podcast about her time as first lady in the first term that I think we put out about a year and a half ago. You can search in the Mo News interview podcast feed. We have a separate Mo News interview podcast. You can search for First Lady. The Melania Trump episode, I think back in 2024, went into detail as to what she was very disinterested in and what she was actually interested in. All right, now time for On This Day in History. We begin in 1959. 12 nations, including the U.S. and the Soviet Union, signed what is called the Antarctica Treaty, banning all military activity and weapons testing in Antarctica. It was the first arms control agreement signed during the Cold War. As we talk about the drug war right now in South America, on this day in 1993, Colombian drug lord Pablo Escobar, who led the powerful Medellin cartel, dies in a shootout with authorities. Jill, for those looking for both some historical information but also entertainment, I highly recommend Narcos, the series that was on Netflix a few years ago, for some background on Escobar, again, based on reality. And on this day in 2001, the Enron Corporation files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, sparking one of the largest corporate scandals in American history. Enron was an energy trading company led by a CEO named Ken Lay. And notoriously, among other things, Lay actually sold large amounts of his Enron stock, even as he was encouraging Enron employees to buy more shares, assuring them that the company was totally okay. It wiped out the retirements of many Enron employees. He and several top officials there at Enron would face charges, though notably Lay would die allegedly of a heart attack just before his sentencing to prison. It also brought down the accounting giant Arthur Andersen. You might not be familiar with Arthur Andersen, but you might be familiar with Accenture. Accenture effectively being the renamed new version of Arthur Andersen in the fallout of the Enron scandal. A bit of music and pop culture history for you on this day. On this day in 1983, the groundbreaking music video for Michael Jackson's Thriller airs on MTV for the first time. Jill, I had to double check this one because I was like, wait, they premiered the Thriller music video in December. They missed a Halloween. And they did. They missed what would have been their first Halloween. But then, of course, starting with Halloween 1984 and beyond, it's sort of like up there with Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas. Like, can you go through a Halloween season without hearing Thriller at some point?
I feel like they didn't have the PR machines that we have now, because if somebody was pitching the song Thriller, they'd be like, okay, October 1st, leading up to Halloween, that's the perfect time for release. However, it clearly did not hurt sales or popularity.
No, they just missed that first Halloween. But there's been 41 Halloweens since then, and we hear Thriller every single time. And then finally, one of my favorite movies, Jill, I used to have this one on DVD and used to watch it repeatedly. Good Will Hunting premiered on this day, featuring Ben Affleck, Matt Damon. They would win Best Screenplay at the Oscars. They would bring their mothers to the Oscars that year. That's how young they were. Propel Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, you might have heard of them, to stardom in Hollywood on this day 28 years ago.
So I actually went on a school trip to see that movie, Moshe. We went on buses into the city for whatever reason to go see Good Will Hunting, and a great movie.
It's interesting when you think back, like the movies that were prioritized in school. Like, I think we mentioned it before during one of the Breakfast Club anniversaries, but freshman year of high school, this would have been the summer of 96. So the movie probably would have been 10 years old. They made a point of showing every high school freshman at my high school, Stevenson High School in Lincolnshire, Illinois, Breakfast Club together. And then we had to discuss it together, about cliques and groups and how we, all have stuff in common. I get where they were coming from.
I buy it. I think that it could backfire because it's also a group of kids who are in detention and bonded.
Don't overthink it, Jill. Don't overthink it.
It was simpler times back then.
It was 2 hours less time that they had to talk to us or teach us about things. Like, everyone, you just got to go watch Breakfast Club right now. Also, we had that added Chicago connection because Breakfast Club is shot at a high school nearby on the North Shore of Chicago.
All right, everybody, that does it for us. Thank you for listening to the Mo News Podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It helps us grow. Follow us, subscribe so you do not miss an episode, and review us kindly in the App Store. Those reviews really help.
See everyone tomorrow.